Hey there, this is Kenzie from Details to Enjoy, and today I'm going to be DIYing the kits from our May and June size B subscription box. The box includes 2 kits that I'm going to be working on at the same time. So first I'm going to start by separating everything by the color that I'm going to paint it. So I have all of my words off to one side, all of the things I'm going to wax off to another side, and both of my inserts are going to be white. While I am going to be using 2 different methods of painting on these inserts, they both do use the same color, which is Silky White by Behr. I'm going to start with my shiplap insert, and I'm going to be painting this solid white, painting in thin coats. It's always best to work in multiple thin coats rather than any thick coats because this will create a smoother finish when you're done and everything will dry much faster. After I get this first coat on, I'm going to need to clean up any of the paint that has pooled in the engraved lines. The kit does include a little tack, and I'm going to use this to scrape out any excess paint. And once I've done that, I'm going to make sure to clean off the excess paint from my tack between each line. After just a few minutes, this coat is dry and I can work on adding my second coat. And again, I'm going to clean the lines out with the tack. You'll want to do this while the paint is wet and between every single coat. Before I do my final coat, I'm going to go ahead and sand my whole insert using one of the clean sanding blocks that's in the kit, and then I'm going to wipe away all the excess dust with a clean, dry cloth. Then I can go in with my third and final coat. The number of coats that you will need will depend on the brand of paint you're using as well as the color. With white, you'll need more coats than with a darker color. Once I've scraped out all of my lines one last time, I can set this aside for later. Next, I'm going to be doing a color wash method on the solid insert, and for this I'll need a cup of water and I need to rehydrate the sponge, so I'm going to completely soak it in the water until it is nice and soft and pliable. Since I used all of my white paint in the last step, I need to squeeze a little bit more white paint onto my tray, and then I'm going to use the sponge to squeeze a few drops of water into the paint to thin it out. After mixing it together with my sponge and adding a little bit more water, I have it about the consistency that I want. Now I can start to apply the paint to my insert using my sponge. The color wash technique is not an exact science, so you may want to play with this method on the back of your insert if you are new to it. I am just working with the paint and rubbing it on until I get the look that I want. The idea of the color wash technique is that the texture of the MDF will show through the paint, so you want it to be slightly transparent. I'm also going through with a wet sponge that I have squeezed the paint out of to remove any excess paint and get it a little bit more transparent. While that dries, I'm going to start working on my letters. I want all of these to be black. This is just plain black paint that we have mixed with the BB paint transformer. So I'm squeezing a little bit of that onto my tray and using a foam brush to apply it to my letters. Just like I did with my inserts, I'm working in light coats. And I don't want very much paint on my brush, so I'm actually tapping off most of the excess, as you can see there, and going in with a fairly dry brush. By not having very much paint on my brush, I ensure that I'm not going to have any paint seeping over the sides and creating a mess, and this just gets a nice thin coat on the very top of my letters, and then later on I can go in with a second coat to get the coverage that I want. And since I was working in such thin coats, by the time I had finished this first coat, the things that I had painted first were already dry and ready for their second coat. Since my letters are black and the sides of the letters are black, it doesn't matter too much if I get paint on the sides. But if you are choosing to paint yours in a color, you also want to use the same technique of having very little paint on your brush, and that will help prevent any paint from getting on the black edges if you want to keep the black edges. You can also choose to paint over the black edges, it just may take a few coats. Another great way to paint lots of little letters like this is to use spray paint. Next, I'm going to be working on the pieces that I'm waxing, which will be this rectangle and the larger of the 2 circles. For this, I'm going to be using the BB dark wax and a foam brush. When using a foam brush with wax, you want to get some product onto the brush and then use that to rub the wax into the piece that you are waxing. The goal is not to coat the piece in a layer of wax, but instead press and rub the wax into the piece. You're also going to use your foam brush to remove any excess wax. For this, I used the side of my brush because it was clean, and you want to make sure that the piece doesn't feel sticky at all and it feels nice and smooth. Then I just repeated those steps for the larger of the two circles. Next, I'm going to assemble my felt flowers, starting with the rose. And with the rose, I'm always going to start with the outer edge of the spiral and work from there. So from here, I start to roll it pretty tightly here in the center of the flower. And as I get towards the outer petals, I'm going to relax a little bit and let these lay a little bit flatter. Once the flower is rolled, I need to secure everything in place. So I'm going to flip the flower over and then place a dab of hot glue in the center of the back of the flower, and then press the end of the spiral into the glue to make sure everything is secure. To create the looped fringe flower, I need to fold this piece in half. So to secure it, I added a dab of hot glue to each corner, and I folded the piece in half. Looking back, I would have done this slightly differently. I either would have folded the piece first and then secured with the hot glue, or I would have started off by doing 3 dots, which you can see I do add a third dot here in the center to make it a little bit more secure. Once that was all put together and glued, I was ready to roll my flower. So I'm just going to start on one end and roll it across to the other end. Right before I reach the end, I'm going to add another dab of hot glue and then finish rolling, and this holds everything in place. Now that my flowers are made, I'm moving back to the letters, and now I'm going to be sanding and distressing these. This step is completely optional. If you want a clean look, you can leave the letters as they are, but I wanted to add some distressing and make them look a little bit worn. Next, I'm going to sand the inserts, and again, this step is optional. In this case, it doesn't change the look very much, but it does make the pieces feel a little bit smoother. The number one thing you want to remember when you are doing this is to use a clean sanding block. If I had used the sanding block that had black on it, it would have transferred to these white inserts, and I also want to make sure to remove all of the excess dust so that everything will stick properly. Now that everything is painted, sanded, and cleaned, I can start to assemble my kits. I did make a small mistake on this kit, so if you're following along, be sure to watch and see how I fix everything. But I started off by putting the string on the top of my quote piece and then using the peel and stick backing to adhere my waxed rectangle on top of the string, creating a sandwich. Once that was secure, I moved on to creating the knob that this is going to hang from. So for this, I need both circles. And starting with the larger circle that we waxed earlier, I'm going to peel off the protective backing, and then I'm going to place the smaller circle face down onto the adhesive, making sure to leave its adhesive side showing on the bottom. Then I'm going to place my template onto the quote piece, and then after I peel off the protective backing, I'm going to place the letters and word into the openings on the template. Once those pieces are stuck on, I can remove the template. Now, as you'll remember earlier, I said I made a mistake when assembling this kit, and here is where I realized it. Once I placed the quote piece onto my insert, I realized that my string was just a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. Everything hung a little bit too low, so I decided to adjust it. So I peeled off the rectangle and moved the string down a little bit. I left the tail so that I could make any adjustments if I needed to, and decided to test it. If you're going to be making this kit, I suggest you test before you adhere anything down. After testing it, I decided this was a little bit too short, so I moved the string just a little bit, and then I was happy with it and cut off the excess. Typically, the adhesive that's on the piece would be enough to hold this down, but since I had peeled it up a couple of times, it was starting to lose a little bit of the stickiness, so I added just a few dabs of hot glue to make sure everything held in place. Once I had reattached the rectangle, I was ready to adhere the rest of the pieces. I started by arranging everything on my insert, making sure that it was centered and looked the way I wanted to. You could use a ruler, but I just decided to eyeball this, and then I peeled off the backing on my circle and attached that, and then peeled the backing off of my large quote piece and attached that, making sure that the string was tight. All that was left was attaching my felt flowers, so first I added the green leaf to the pink flower with a dab of hot glue, and then I also used hot glue to attach the flowers to the insert. Next, I needed to add my words to my shiplap insert, so I grabbed my Garden Grown template and placed that in the center of the insert. Again, you could use a ruler if you want to be exact, and then I secured it in place using some washi tape. And then again, I just used the peel and stick backing to adhere all of my words and letters into the holes in the template. Once everything was placed, I gave everything a quick press to make sure it was stuck and then removed my template. And now both of my inserts are complete and ready to display in my pocket frame. If you create your own version of this project, we'd love to see it, so tag us in social media. We are Details to Enjoy on Instagram and Facebook.